Great. So what I'm going to talk about this morning is about haptics and collaboration. I think one of the projects, at least, is involving collaboration, the drumming project, but there's a big opportunity in the research space around collaboration and haptics, and we'll talk about that today and just talk about some ideas, and for about 40 minutes or so. So, first of all, collaboration is super important, as we all know. Paulo Freire, who's a famous Brazilian philosopher, said that only through communication can human life hold meaning. So that's a pretty powerful statement. And we see that through history, because communication is so important, we've developed many technologies to help with communication, all the way from cave paintings through to newspapers and radio and TV. And then today, we're kind of hyper connected with our mobile devices, and all the time we're connected and communicating. So, in my opinion, there's three communication trends that are happening right now. One is a trend to more improved content capture. So, previously, when we were communicating, it was about voice and face. But what people are doing now is wearing cameras and they're capturing their surroundings and sharing that as well. So, you've seen lots of first-person videos, and it's more about moving from sharing faces to sharing places. Secondly, we've got hugely increased network bandwidth. So when I first started computing, it was dial-up modems and 56K baud modems, and now my house here in Mawson Lakes, I have a gigabit fiber connection, and so I can stream high bandwidth video and have very realistic communication. And then most interestingly, we've got, through the use of AI, we've got implicit understanding. So now what we can do is we can recognize people's behaviors and emotions. So that picture there shows a picture, and then of the picture, there's been some estimate of how old those people are and what expression they're currently showing. So these three areas, more natural collaboration, experience capture, and implicit understanding, they all combine together in this field, and of course, all surrounded by AI, of empathic computing. And so this is what my lab does here in Australia and in New Zealand. We are focusing on empathic computing and new types of collaboration. So you all know what empathy is, I think. Alfred Adler said that empathy is seeing with the eyes of another, listening with the ears of another, and feeling with the heart of another. And so empathic computing is really about, can we build systems that allow us to to share what we're seeing, hearing, and feeling with other people. So it goes beyond video conferencing. It's about sharing the experience and about being part of that experience. So there's really three key elements. One is understanding what people are feeling, and and then secondly is being able to experience what they're experiencing, and thirdly is being able to share communication cues. And each of these have different technology that you can use to help make them possible. So with emotion recognition, it's really about using physiological sensors. So you can detect your heart rate or your brain activity and use that to understand what people's how much cognitive load they're under or their emotion they're feeling. Then with experiencing and content sharing, virtual reality is really good for that. So when you put a VR headset on, you feel like you're in another place. And there's some VR technology you can use to scan your room and to jump into other places. And then for sharing, uh, in our work, we've been using augmented reality a lot. And this allows you to overlay virtual cues on somebody else's view. So I can be wearing a camera and a headset, and you can be somewhere else, and you can point at something, and in my view, I can see you pointing at something and say that, let's talk about that. So those are some of the key elements, and I'll give you a couple of examples of some projects, and I'll talk about how you can use haptics in those. So one of the very first projects we did was this project called Empathy Glasses. And the idea of this was to combine together eye tracking, a display, and face expression recognition, and to basically try and share the cues that people normally have in face-to-face communication. So in face-to-face communication, you have a lot of implicit cues around people's face expression or their eye gaze. But when you're on video conferencing, or sometimes you lose those cues, especially if you're not looking at somebody's face, but looking at their place they're streaming. So we combined them together. We combined an eye tracker together with some AR glasses and a special pair of glasses called the effective wear glasses that can be used to recognize your face expression. And so the effective wear glasses, they use photosensors, and they measure the distance to your skin. And when you squint your eyes or make a different face expression, we can recognize that because the distance between your skin and the glasses changes. So it can recognize up to 85 to 8 face expressions, up to 95% accuracy. So here's the system here. The person's wearing all this gear, and then on the right-hand side, you can see what they're seeing. So in their face, they're seeing a video of the real world, and it's a little bit hard to see, but you'll see that in the video there's a green spot in the middle of the video there. There's a green spot here. This represents the remote person's pointer. So the remote person could see what you're seeing and point on the video, so they can show you what they're interested in. But then more importantly, above that is this red spot. This red spot is the eye gaze of the person wearing the system. So this is super important because this now means that I know where you're looking. And just seeing the video of your field of view, that doesn't really tell me exactly where you're looking. And so this gaze, of course, provides a very important implicit cue because people always look at things before they pick them up or move them. So now I know what you're about to do because I can see where you're looking. I can also tell if you're paying attention because if I move my green pointer around and say, oh, we should pick up this piece of object, if your eye is not moving with my green pointer, it means you're not looking where I'm pointing. So those two cues are important. And then you can see on the bottom side, there's a heart rate indicator, and then on the left side, there's a face expression indicator showing their smiling face. So this was one of the first wearable systems ever developed that shared remote gaze and two-directional pointing. So let me show you this working. So you can see the person is wearing the system, and you can see they're assembling this picture out of blocks, and the remote person is watching on their laptop computer, and he can now use his mouse to move the pointer around and show what he's wants to do, and then he can use he can track the person's eye gaze as well, so he can tell them if they're paying attention or not. And when the person's finished, he smiled, and so the facial expression changed to a smile, and the heart rate is monitoring you as well. So that's obviously a lot of gear, but now 10 years later, we're getting systems now that can be integrating that all into one. So we've got smart glasses that integrate eye tracking and AR, VR systems that are integrating face expression recognition and so forth. And what we found with this is that by sharing the pointer, it gives a remote person or the person who's doing the task a feeling that a remote person's in the space helping them. So it's kind of remote presence. And that sharing that eye gaze cues gave a very important implicit communication cue as well. So there's one big problem with this though, and that is that the remote person can only see a small part of your real world, just where the camera's pointing. And so that doesn't give them a very big sense of remote presence because they're only seeing the table you're looking at. So Gunn here and myself did a follow-on project to this that looked at sharing more of your surroundings. So now in this project, the person is who's doing the task is wearing a 360-degree video camera, and they're live streaming 360-degree video to a remote person, and the remote person now is in a VR headset. So now the remote person can look wherever they want, and because they're streaming a 360-degree video, they feel immersed in your space. And we used a hand tracking system, and the remote person then could make hand gestures, and the person on the left who's doing the task in the AR view, they'll see these kind of ghost hands floating in space. So let me show you a video of this working. This is showing a person at a power company, and they're trying to learn how to operate this quite complicated control panel. And so they're wearing the Microsoft HoloLens 360 camera. This is what they see, and they see this green annotation from the remote person and the kind of grey ghost hand. And then you can see also there's a green square there. That green square shows where the remote person's looking, and so they can know they can look around any direction. And now this is the view of the remote person. They're inside the VR environment, and they can annotate and draw in the environment. And because they set a 360 camera view, it's almost like they are standing inside the body of the person doing the task. So you really feel like you're in the same location. So this achieves what we talked about before with empathic computing, is that you're seeing what somebody else is seeing, understanding what they're doing. So those are two examples of empathic systems. And we've all seen now there are many other examples of using AR and VR for remote collaboration. The bottom right-hand side is particularly impressive. This is the Apple Vision Pro, and they have these personas, and they use the sensors and the cameras on the system to create an almost photorealistic copy of you. So if you make a call with a persona, then the person feels like they're really floating in space in front of you. But one of these missing elements with these systems is the sense of touch. So with these AR and VR systems, you can create quite a strong sense of remote presence. You can really feel that people are there with you in your space or in VR with you, but you can't touch them. And Dasha Keltner, who's a famous neuropsychologist in the US, says that touch is a fundamental language of human connection. And he spent years of studying touch, and he can tell you that he says, I can tell you that they're far more profound than we usually realize. That touch is our primary language of compassion. So we can try and build systems to connect with each other, but unless we can touch each other, we're kind of missing out on a big thing. And when I gave a version of this talk last year, at that time I did a search on Scopus about the research. And it turns out, over the last 20 or 30 years, there's been about 11,000 papers published about haptics. So it's a very popular topic. If you look at haptics and AR and VR, it drops down to about 3,000 or so. And then if you looked at haptics and AR and VR and talking about communication, it's dropping down to about 300. And if you look at about remote communication, there's only 5 papers published. And in the IEEE Haptics conference last year, there was really only a few papers being published around communication and remote communication and haptics. So there's a huge research opportunity there about trying to use haptics in terms of remote connection. So if any of you are potential PhD students or doing a PhD looking for a research topic, this will be a really great topic to work on, because almost nobody has published in this area. So let me show you some examples of how you can use haptics. And then yesterday we learned about electrohaptic and vibrohaptic technology, and you can imagine how some of those could be used for collaboration as well. So first of all, some of the work, in fact, that Anthony's been doing is around building devices for haptic devices that could be used for remote touch. So if you want to be able to do remote touch, you have to have the devices. You can also look at using haptics to convey touch from different characters. You can share physiological cues, and you can also modulate cues as well. So, for example, this is what Anthony's been working on in Auckland over the last couple of years, is building very lightweight haptic motors that can be used to provide a sense of touch. So in this case, he's got these small motors that are attached to your fingertips, a little bit like the VibraForge kit that you're going to be using here, but a little bit smaller. And so one of the applications we used that for was for a haptics VR painting, and which is very similar to what Rob and his group are going to do for their finger painting exercise. But in this case, you can use this in VR. You can track people's finger movement, and you could paint. And then we could also track the distance between the fingers. And so as you squeeze your fingers together, the width of the paintbrush changed. So this allowed you. So here's a video of this.
Hand gestures are important for artists and creatives. However, gestural input devices in VR are still underexplored. Our study designed and implemented a wearable device. Utilizing MetaQuest Pro's hand tracking capacities, we invented a multi-dynamic interaction system featuring gestural recognition, pressure sensing, and haptic feedback. The inspiration for this study stems from traditional ink painting and calligraphy, where the force and gesture of the hand are crucial for expressing various visual qualities in the artwork. This device aims to replicate the tactile feedback and fluid motions in VR. It is designed to provide a more intimate and expressive VR painting experience by foregrounding the body as a dynamic input. The system uses finger gestures as a dynamic input for controlling the brush size. The tracings vary in real time as the pinching gesture changes between narrow and wide. We designed PalmPal, a handheld device made of a soft silicone tactile sensor that changes capacitance value when deformed by pressure. We have correlated this with the opacity of the brushstroke, resembling the water-to-ink ratio in traditional ink paintings. We also included a haptic feedback device on the fingertip consisting of two piezoelectric motors, and a custom driver circuit board was used to drive the haptic motors with the haptic signal from the PC. This feature complements the immaterial characteristics often felt in VR painting. This one-hand interaction system enhances the overall creative experience, making it more intuitive and engaging than using a VR controller. Similar to learning to paint with any new medium, the device and system require practice to become accustomed to.
So I'll stop that. So you got to see all the components. So those are an example of how you can build lightweight haptic systems that easy. In this case, it's applied into painting, but we can use those same systems for collaboration. I'll show you that in just a second as well. And it worked very well. Once you had got some practice, you could squeeze, as you saw there, and the paintbrush width would change. You got vibration while you're painting, so you could know that you're leaving the paint ink down and things like that. So a second area for integrating in haptics into collaboration is around using agents. And so we've seen over the last decade or so an evolution in virtual characters. So some of you may use Siri on your phones or an Amazon Alexa. So you've got a conversational agent that is disembodied, just as a text. And then we've seen now characters appearing in 2D screens. So some of you, when you go online shopping, sometimes there's a menu popping up and you can have a chat with a chat bot about what you're buying. And now we're starting to see characters embedded in 3D space. So using AR and VR, you can have intelligent characters that are coming in space with you. And so we've been doing some work on building more empathic mixed reality characters. So these are characters that appear in augmented reality as a life-size virtual person, but we can measure your physiological response so we can then know how you're feeling and tell the character, and then the character can change its behavior. And so the idea is you saw this circle around empathic computing. So we've got these empathic mixed reality agents that are agents that now understand the empathic state of people. And then what we did is using the system that Anthony developed, we created a system that allowed the agent to touch you. And you could do this with also the VibraForge as well. So in this case, you've got this 10-channel vibration system, and we wanted to create the feeling of touch on your forearm. And so when the character talks with you, you can see the person here is wearing this set of vibrators. They're also wearing a heart rate sensor as well. So the character knows how you're feeling, and at different times in interaction, it might reach out and touch you on your forearm. And when that happens, you can feel that sense of touch. And we did this using a desert survival task. So in this case, you had to work with the character to pick out what objects are the best for you to use when you have a plane crash and you've got these different objects in the plane. So I'll show you the video here. And so we had here's all the objects appearing in AR.
Hello there, I'm thrilled to embark on this desert survival game with you. We've got quite the adventure ahead, don't we? Among the items scattered on your left, let's start with securing the life-saving necessity that obviously stands out.
So now you can talk to the character. So you're going to pick the objects and put them in which order you think are most important, but the order may not be the right order. So there's some studies showing which ones like the water is most important, so that. So the character will give you feedback and saying, well, this one might be better to swap with the other one. And when the character does that, we had one condition where the character would touch you, and another condition where the character would not touch you, and one condition with haptics and without
Hi,
haptics.
Alex. What should I do next?
So he's asking what should we do next? And it will say, and then if you watch, you see.
Consider moving the cosmic mirror down the list for now. It's important, but let's prioritize your code first.
And when the character touched her forearm, sometimes you'd feel the touch, and sometimes you wouldn't feel the touch. You wanted to see what was the impact of the haptics versus no haptics. And so this is the result here. What we have a score here of realism. And then on the bottom here, three different conditions. One condition is the is visual touch by itself. A second one is the haptics by itself without touching. And the third one is the visual and the haptics together. So when the character touches you and the haptics vibrate. And what we found was that having the visual and touch together, people thought was definitely more realistic than the tactile touch by itself. And people also preferred that condition. You can see on the right-hand side which one they like the most. And the blue one is the having the visual and haptic touch together. And the green one is the visuals just by itself. So on the top bar there, you can see 90% of the people thought having the visual and haptic touch together was much better than just having the visuals by itself. We didn't find any physiological data significance. We thought, well, when the person touched you, your heart rate might go up or improve, but it didn't change in any way. So that shows a very simple example of how you can add remote touch into a virtual avatar. In this case, the avatar was driven by AI, but you could easily imagine how you could change that and have the avatar driven by a real person. So if you want to reach out and touch somebody, you could have a suit or some special clothing that would transmit that touch to somebody else as well. And today, when Steve comes, he's going to bring with him the Tesla suit. And yesterday we learned the Tesla suit provides the EMS, the electrical simulation, to provide that remote touch. So you could both be wearing Tesla suits and I could touch you and you could feel the vibration where I'm touching you. So a second project I want to talk about is sharing physiological cues. So we had the idea that maybe if you were playing a game or doing something in VR with somebody else, if you could share your heart rate with that person so they can understand how you're feeling, that might create some more connection. So we built this VR system where a person would play a game, and then a second person, the observer, would be in the first person's body. So you're both sharing the same body. And then the person who's playing their game, we would measure their heart rate using a biometric glove that had a heart rate sensor in it. And then the person who is observing, we would show them the heart rate. And one of the interesting questions is how do you show the heart rate? So in this case, we had a virtual heart beating, but you also had the sound of the heart rate as well. But you could imagine other ways of showing heart rate, like you could put a sign saying the person's feeling excited or whatever. And so we had them doing this in two different environments. One was this butterfly world, which was kind of a peaceful, calm environment where you're collecting butterflies. A second was a zombie attack game where you were in a very dark warehouse and zombies would come and attack you and you had to shoot them with your gun before they killed you. And you can see on the right-hand side, there's a little heart but on the left-hand side, there's no heart. So then we had a condition where we were not sharing the heart rate and we were sharing the heart rate. So
In
here's
this
a video.
research, we explore the effects of sharing physiological states of players in collaborative virtual reality gameplay. Our goal is to improve and enhance users' empathy among collaborators, especially in a remote setting using advanced computer interfaces. To support this study, we developed a collaborative VR framework which shares the player's position and heart rate to the observer in a virtual environment. The observers view the game from the player's position, but can rotate their head freely to look around. The player's heart rate is measured by a biometric glove. The measured heart rate is shared with the observer using both visual and audio cues. We developed two games based on this framework. The first game provides a calm and pleasing experience where the player catches butterflies while surrounded by nature. The second game presents a scary and stressful situation where the player tries to survive zombie attacks. We conducted a study to learn the effects of displaying the player's heart rate to the observer.
Okay, so what we found, we were trying to explore, well, what's the impact of showing the heart rate? And as I said, we had these two games and we had different measures. Measure the heart rate of the player, we could measure their emotions, and there's this other measure called the inclusion of other and self, which measures the connection with the other person you feel. And what we found was that, first of all, the two environments made a significant difference in heart rate. So people did indeed find that they were more scared in the zombies. So you can see in the heart rate sharing condition, the zombie heart rate went up to 112 on average compared to the butterflies, which was 99. So it was more difference. We also found that sharing that created a positive effect. So people felt more positive towards the other person. And it also, the inclusion of self and other created a more a significant connection between people as well. So sharing that heart rate made you feel more connected to the other person as well, sharing the same experience. But one of the questions around is how do you share your heart rate? Like, do you want to just have an audio cue? Do you want to have a visual cue, haptic cues? You could imagine if you're holding a controller in your hand in VR, the controller could pulse with the heart rate of the other person as well. Um, so we did another experiment where we had a VR safari experience, and people went through this safari environment, and then at different parts of the safari, there were different scenes they would see designed to cause different emotional states. So you can see the middle one shows a bunch of dead animals, and this is supposed to create the feeling of sadness. And then the right one, it's hard to see, but there's an animal attacking you in the safari. And this is supposed to create a sense of fear. And then we combined different representations of heart rate. So one of them had no heart rate, one of them had audio and visual, so you can see the heart there beating. One of them had visual and haptic, so you had a beating heart but no sound, but you could feel the pulse of the haptic controller. And then you can combine them all together. So here's this one here. This is the safari. Designed to be built. Because most people have been feeling how they're getting a trust in the quiet and feel. Your voice going out of the question that you feel. Audio, so you can trust feel the heart broken. On the visual feedback. Then here's the haptic feedback. You can't see that of course, just using haptic feedback controllers. Motion and controller. Uh, so that was the different conditions. And then what we found is we measured on the survey how people felt about those. We used the PANIS subjective scale again, and we had ranked and looked at different interview questions. And so first of all, in terms of the ranking, this is on a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is the favorite and 5 is the worst. You can see that the baseline condition, which had no feedback, was ranked about 3.7 on average, which is much worse than the audio-visual condition that had 2.6, or the audio-haptic that had 2.2. So the audio-haptic was ranked best. People liked hearing the heart rate and feeling the heart rate, but didn't really want to see it, the heart beating. That was kind of a visual distraction. So being able to hold the person's heart in your hand and feel it beating was very powerful. And they also appreciated, you could also hear your own heart rate as well. On the right-hand side, it shows the heart rate of the participants depending on the different conditions, but there was no difference in that one as well. So we also looked at how you could see if sharing heart rate improved collaboration on a collaborative task. So in that task, you had two people in the safari together, but they weren't collaborating, they were just sharing the ride. But in this experiment, we looked at how we could do three different types of collaborative tasks. One was an escape room where you had to work together to escape out of this room. Second was exploring a space, and the third was arranging furniture. And then we turned on and off the heart rate sharing using the audio haptic cues we just talked about before. And what we found with this one is that sharing the heart rate significantly improved the other sense of presence. So you can see there on the left graph is the score of co-presence. And the the three bars show the three different colors of different environments. One's the escape room, exploration and furniture. And on the right is when you turn the heart rate off, and you can see that the sense of co-presence is low, about 1. When you turn the heart rate sharing on, then it goes up to between 2 and 3.5. So just by having that audio cue and the heart rate beating, it made a feeling a lot more, a higher sense of co-presence, even though in both cases you could see the virtual avatar of the other person. And then in terms of emotional state, it also improved the sense that you could understand how the other person was feeling. So the right-hand side is showing how well that people felt they could understand the other person's feeling. And one of the people made this comment, it's great to feel my carer's heart rate. It makes me feel like I'm not alone. So, but the task we had a significant effect on the results as well. So it's a very simple cue to add, being able to pulse the control of somebody's heart rate, but these show that it provides a very important sense of presence or co-presence. But then we did another experiment saying, well, what happens if we share a fake heart rate? You know, if I measure your heart rate, and then if I artificially accelerate it or slow it down and share it with the other person, will they notice, or will they think that you're more excited than you really are? And so we did an experiment on this one, and we did the jungle safari again, but this time we measured people's heart rate using a polar heart rate sensor, and we artificially changed it. So we made it speed up 15% or 30%, or slow down 15% or 30%, and then we tried to see if people could notice the difference in heart rate. And what we found was that uh, there was no significant change in the other person's heart rate. So if I accelerated your heart rate, the heart rate didn't go up, but it did have a significant effect on recorded excitement. So the other person would feel that you're a lot more excited than you really are because they can see your heart rate going up, even though you're not feeling more excited because it's going there. And people didn't notice a small amount of change, but they noticed a lot of change. So when we increased the heart rate by 30%, then the other person noticed, but when 15%, they didn't notice at all. So this is kind of interesting. So what this means is you can artificially change how you represent other people's emotions, and they can notice and they feel that you're more excited or less excited than you really are. So there's a few research opportunities in this space. Of course, with the new technology in AR and VR, we've got much better displays. We've got better opportunities to capture real spaces. We can do natural hand tracking and eye tracking. And the one thing that I'm really excited about is being able to have devices that have some of these sensors all integrated into them. So in the experiments I showed you, people had to hold a heart rate sensor or wear a heart rate sensor, and it was kind of a pain to have all this other technology that you had to have to measure your emotion. But there are some devices now coming on the market that have these sensors integrated into them. So, for example, this is the Galea display from OpenBCI, and the Galea puts sensors into the faceplate of the VR display. So, those of you who've used the Quest before, you've got a pad that pushes against your face. You could put heart rate sensor or EOG sensor to measure your eye movement, or EDA to measure your stress inside the pad. So now we know how you're feeling. And the Galea also has EEG sensors. So the white part across the top there, that's a set of 8 EEG sensors that can measure brain activity. So when you put the headset on, it measures all the stuff about you without you having to wear any additional devices. And because of that, you can measure some really interesting things. So for example, with measuring the EMG, or the movement of the face muscles, we can use that to measure face expression. We can measure the EDA, or your sweating, to use that to measure your arousal. We can measure the brain activity to measure cognitive load, or we can measure the eye movement to measure your attention as well. So these are all cues that can be used to communicate with somebody else. Some of these cues we have in normal face-to-face communication, like eye gaze, but some we don't. You know, when you're communicating with somebody, you don't really know what's happening in their brain and the cognitive load that they're. So we can use some of these to provide kind of a super type of communication that's extra from what we normally have. So we've been doing some work on that as well, and trying to explore how this could be used to enhance communication. And one of the early projects we did was being able to measure physiological cues in a teaching environment. So you can imagine people teaching remotely. You've got one person who's the instructor, somebody else who's the student, and they're trying to use VR to teach you how to, in this case, how to assemble a car engine. And so it's kind of a complicated task. So while you're doing that, both people are represented by avatars, but the student, on the bottom right-hand side, you can see how they have this extra stuff around them. And so we have this brain icon that shows how active their brain is. We have an attention icon that shows whether or not they're paying attention to what you're saying, and we have a heart rate icon as well. So now, when you're teaching the person, you can look at them and you can see if their brain is working hard and whether or not the lesson is too hard for them. You can look to see whether they're paying attention to what you're talking about and your heart rate. So here's a video of this working. So in this case, first of all, we have to measure your brain activity, your brain cognitive activity level. So we use this NBAC task that measures your cognitive capacity. And then we put you into the VR environment and you do this collaborative training task. And then around the avatar, you'll see his icons. So you'll see above his head this brain icon that changes color. So it's kind of a complicated task. And above, so you can see the brain icon right now is yellow. So it's kind of average cognitive load. Before it was red, and so it's a high level cognitive load. And so our goal was to be able to use these cues to convey information about the other person. And we did a small study to see if they helped or not. And you can see there on the pie chart, the first pie chart shows the amount of time that people spent looking at these different physiological cues. It turned out that the teacher didn't spend very much time, around 5% looking at the cues. But despite that, the users had a preference for having the cues to monitor their state. The preference rating on the bottom there shows the user preference, and the combined one at the bottom, that's when you combine showing all these cues together, and it's the green shows it's ranked first, and so the green one, the combined one, and the attention ones are both higher ranking. But there's a lot more research that can be done. So in this case, there's a big question about how do you represent those cues? You know, do you want to have a brain above somebody's head showing that they're thinking hard, or do you want to have a line showing their mental state, things like that? So there's some research challenges. How do you represent emotions using haptics? You know, when people are feeling angry, does the vibrator vibrate more, or does it slow when they're feeling sad? How can you combine visual and audio haptic cues to represent how somebody's feeling? How can you represent physiological cues? Like I showed before, do you have a brain, all these lines? Can you use this to cause emotional states? So when I talked before about changing the heart rate, that felt the other person, make the other person feel more excited. And then how can you integrate haptics with other senses as well? So just to wrap up, today I've talked a little bit about empathic computing, and this is what we're doing in our lab here in Australia and in New Zealand. And it's really about combining AR and VR and sensing to create more improved connection. And it turns out there's been very little research done on using haptics for remote connection. So there's a big opportunity in that space. And then there's significant research opportunities, as I showed before, around building new devices, conveying touch, representing emotion, combining with other senses as well. So there's a lot of work could be done in this space as well. So it's a very, very exciting area of research. So that's what I want to talk about today for here. Let me just see. We've covered a bunch of stuff. So does anybody have any questions about what I've talked about today so far? And anybody online, if you've got questions, I've got the chat window open here so I can see what you're doing as well. Any questions?